From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Of all the insects that could turn up in your yard, the Japanese beetle is one of the nastiest. Its larvae chew up the roots of your grass. The mature version of the beetle eats just about every plant in your yard, from grapevines to your roses to your linden trees. And worst of all, it's tough to eradicate. Japanese beetles are an invasive species that turn up across Colorado's Front Range, and recently a new infestation appeared in the Grand Valley, which has all those peach growers in Palisade on edge. Our guest today studies how to contain outbreaks like this one. Whitney Cranshaw is a retired insect expert with Colorado State University Extension. Whitney, welcome to In The NoCo.
Glad to be here.
As I mentioned, you've studied the Japanese beetle fairly extensively. What fascinates you about them?
Well, it is unusual among insects in that it's essentially two different kinds of pests. The young stages develop on the roots of grasses, and in the eastern U.S., it's the most important turfgrass insect in that part of the country. And then the adult, which is what most people see around here, has an extraordinarily large host range. So no other insect is like that in our U.S. Palette of bugs.
And I understand you have been dealing with them from a very early age.
Yes, I tell people that my first bug job was picking Japanese beetles off my dad's roses, and he'd give me 1 penny for 10. And I made good money as a kid.
Oh, wow. Just shows you how many there are.
Yeah.
So the Japanese beetle is not native to the U.S. It arrived on the East Coast about a century ago and reached Colorado in the early 2000s. What brought it here?
In order to get across the high plains, it had to have been brought by people in some manner. A common way would be larval stages, the grubs on the roots of plants that were moved here with soil. But it can also be moved in cars and airplanes even. They fly in open doors and get moved around that way. But mostly it's been with plants and nursery material.
And it seems like it's here to stay.
Yes, it's definitely here to stay. There's some hope that they can eradicate it from the West Slope, but here in eastern Colorado, it is here to stay, and it has gotten worse and worse and worse, at least for the first 10 years after people first starting to notice it in their landscape. We have lots of irrigated turf grass in our urban areas in Colorado, and that is very favorable for the young stages to do well and then produce a big crop of adults the next year.
You mentioned the Western Slope. The beetle has now been found in western Colorado despite pretty intense efforts to keep it from spreading there. How did it get there this time?
Increasingly, I think, accidentally in vehicles, because we have it so commonly in the East. And so maybe somebody drove and they had 3 or 4 beetles in their car, and that's not uncommon. But it could have been nursery stock too. Nobody knows. By the time you notice it, it's probably been there 3, 4, 5 years.
Mm. Well, and this isn't the first time we've seen an infestation on the Western Slope. It turned up in Palisade a few years ago. How did you eradicate it back then?
That was one of the very few cases where this insect has been successfully eradicated. And it was only found in the city of Palisade, fairly small community within the city center. There was made available funds that were sufficient to, over several years, eradicate it through the use of insecticides, through the use of extensive trapping. And also, some people would let their lawns dry out a little bit in July when the adults are laying eggs and the larvae are hatching. And if the soil becomes dry during that period, they die. So it was a combination of things, but it was an isolated area.
Yeah, I mean, this new infestation appears to be much bigger than that. How optimistic are you that this one can be stopped?
I'm not too optimistic personally. The one in the West Slope, it's over several square miles now. We'll see. It depends on how many resources are applied to it and what they plan to do. But it'll take a lot of money, and I'm not sure that that's going to be made available.
You talked about mass trapping of Japanese beetle the first time it was found in Palisade. Is that an option here?
There is a trap for Japanese beetle that is one of the most amazing traps for any insect. I mean, it is made of three compounds that are from flowers that happen to be super attractive, and they will draw them in. You can catch buckets of them in a day in a heavily infested area.
Ew.
And they are really good for detecting if we have new areas where Japanese beetle is. But in terms of control of Japanese beetle, that is way more problematic because more beetles tend to be brought into the vicinity of a trap than the trap captures. So you will actually have more damage on plants near a Japanese beetle trap than if you didn't have that trap. So in most cases, we do not recommend it for control. In the Palisade case, they were trying to throw everything they had at it to totally eradicate it. But here along the Front Range now, no. I say if you want a trap, give it to your neighbor. You'll get more benefit if your neighbor has your trap than if you have it.
So what are you doing to stop this current outbreak on the Western Slope?
On the Western Slope, they're going to use insecticides. They're trapping in part to control, but also to figure out what the limit of the infestation is so that they know where to direct efforts for management.
Now, I know you've been studying something called biocontrols that might help contain or kill the beetles. What kind of solutions seem promising to you?
So the idea of biological control for Japanese beetle, I think, is the most promising long-term way to manage this insect. So there are things that attack Japanese beetle in the eastern U.S., things that were actually originally brought over from Japan and Korea, where this insect is native, and established 80 years ago in the eastern U.S., that are just things that attack Japanese beetle.
Okay.
And the beetles came to Colorado, but none of these other enemies that attack them were brought. So there has been an effort since 2015 to start to introduce a few of the things that attack just Japanese beetle and get it established in Colorado. And one of these is very well established, a fungal disease. Another thing is an insect that's been introduced several times that attacks the adult stage, lays its eggs on it, and kills it.
Well, let's say I have Japanese beetles in my garden. What is the best way to deal with them?
One way that can work is hand picking. I mean, it is labor intensive, but hand picking actually can work quite well for Japanese beetle, more so than other insects. The typical way to do it would be to maybe have a can of some soapy water to drown them and just put it under the leaves or flowers where they are. But do it early in the morning. They don't move around a whole lot until maybe 9 o'clock or so. And get out early and they'll just fall right in. And once they're flying all over the place, you can't do it.
Fighting an invasive species like this seems to me like such a thankless and a never-ending job. What keeps you working on frustrating infestations like this?
Oh, that's what I always did. That was my job. I mean, my entire program while I was at CSU was, trying to figure out what's the best way to manage whatever people were complaining about the most.
Whitney Cranshaw is Professor Emeritus in Entomology with CSU Extension. Thank you so much for talking with me about the work you do.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.